Hi, I'm Len with Hobby Universe Woodworking, and today I'm going to be connecting dust collection and water to my NextWave HD510 CNC router machine. I've had the machine for a few years, but it's been just kind of sitting in storage in the basement of a new house we just moved into. I had a lot of renovations to take care of upstairs, which are now mostly complete. So now I'm able to take some time, come down into the basement, and start working in the woodshop, getting things put in their place and put back together. So this thing's been sitting for a while. It's got some dust on it. Not going to bother cleaning it until I get everything put back on it. Maybe I'll just hit it with the vacuum real quick. But anyway, it's got a water-cooled spindle, so I need to connect it to a water supply, which I'll show you what that looks like and how I get that configured, as well as dust collection and the vacuum I chose for dust collection and why I chose that specific vacuum, which I'm very, very happy with. Not going to be a terribly long video, and I'm not going to get into a lot of the details as far as operation of the machine outside of maybe a quick test run. Down the road, I will make some additional videos showing, what the machine can do and some of the finished product and my processes for attaching the workpiece to the work table and things like that. But again, for this video, it's going to be pretty basic, just getting it all put back together so we can start making some sawdust. I'm going to start by reassembling the water coolant system. I have 4 gallons of distilled water, and the reason I use distilled water is where I live I have a well, and well water can be what they refer to as hard, so it has minerals and other things in it that could potentially cause scaling or mineral buildup inside of lines or possibly the spindle, things like that down the road. I certainly don't want that to happen. Distilled water, cheap insurance to make sure things keep running smoothly. I have a small submersible pump. I think this is probably a pump you'd use if you had a little outdoor water feature, maybe a small waterfall or something like that. That would probably the main purpose of that was. But anyway, little suction cups, 4 feet. I'll stick it to the bottom of the bucket. I'll add the water. Once the water's in, I plug it in. It'll pump the water out of the bucket through the spindle and then back into the bucket. And it's a sealed system. It'll just continually recycle that same 4 gallons of water. And it truly is a sealed system because I had it hooked up for over 2 years prior to taking it apart and moving it here, and I never had to add any water to it. That original 4 gallons was mostly still there. So I did check it once in a while, and I also have a meter that shows me the water is moving through the spindle when it's on, and I'll show you that once we get this all hooked up and going. Before adding water or the pump to the bucket, I made sure it was clean. It is. Also made sure the feet on my pump were nice and clean, so that way they stick to the bottom of the bucket. I added a little bit of water, again, just to help the suction cups grab the bottom of the bucket. If I get that in, I push that down, and I've got a small slit I put in the side of the bucket that'll allow the power cord to pass out of the bucket, even with the lid pressed securely down. I want this lid on nice and tight because I want this to be a sealed system so the water is not continuously evaporating and then I have to keep adding water or worry that my spindle's not getting the water it needs because so much has had evaporated. Same is true for these holes where this tubing passes through. I believe this is 1/4-inch tubing. I drilled the holes almost exactly matching the size of the tube. That hole's actually just a tiny bit smaller than the hose. So this is a very, very tight fit. Again, we're not going to have a lot of evaporation, which is what we want. So you've got your return tube and then the tube that the water gets pumped out of up into the spindle. And then also something I wanted to show is that I use heavy duty food grade buckets. For this portion, for the water cooling, it's really not as important. But when we start talking about the dust collection, you're definitely going to want a heavier bucket if you have a strong vacuum. And I'll explain why when we get to that part. So for now, I'm just going to add the rest of the water to this. So we'll have a total of 4 gallons. I'll snap this lid down and we can move on. The bucket is full. I plugged in the pump. I could hear it turned on. The water's flowing just the way it's supposed to. But one of the things I wanted to show you was this little gauge that I picked up on Amazon. And what it does is it rotates when the water is actually flowing through it. And the reason that's important is because prior to having that with that orange tubing that's not transparent, there was no real way to know with absolute certainty that the spindle was getting the coolant it needed. You would assume such, you can hear the pump running, but really you didn't know. And if the spindle is not getting that coolant and it runs for a long period of time without, you could damage it or even ruin it completely. So knowing that water is flowing is really important to me. That gauge was fairly inexpensive, easy to install, and it gives me peace of mind that the coolant is passing through the spindle as it's supposed to. Here are all the components for my dust collection system. At the heart of the system is going to be the shop vac. In my case, I went with this unit. It's a fine turbo, which is a very powerful small unit, and it's also pretty darn quiet, which is good. This wood shop is in the basement of my house, and I really don't want to have a really noisy shop vac running all the time, because a lot of the carves I do on this machine take several hours, 10, 12 hours in some cases. It really will run a long time. It would get annoying if that thing was super loud. It is also an absolute beast when it comes to suction power at over 150 cubic feet per minute. I'm not affiliated with this company. My only experience with them so far has been this vacuum. But again, it's just a beast. And because of the power of this thing, that's why I was talking about having to use a food grade heavy duty bucket. When I first got this vacuum and I had everything all set up, I used just the big box store orange 5-gallon inexpensive bucket, turned that thing on, and it actually had enough power that it pulled the bucket in on itself. It collapsed. Absolutely could not believe it. So then I thought, well, maybe if I double up somehow, maybe magically that would help. It didn't help. So I ended up reading other people having similar issues with that vacuum. Got the heavy duty food grade buckets, and these will hold up. These do not suck in on themselves. On the top of the bucket, I have a Cyclone dust collection system. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on these. I'll just say that they are absolutely worth their weight in gold. If you don't have one and you're using a shop vac, I highly recommend it. This thing works phenomenally. I have all my hoses, everything. We'll get all that hooked up. I'll show you what that looks like once everything's connected. And I also have this copper wire. And the copper wire is there to prevent static electricity. I've read where people have had issues with their CNC machines glitching, and they thought maybe it was related to static electricity. And that's because those machines work off of a VFD or variable frequency drive, which can be really sensitive to power fluctuations or that quick little zap you might get from a static discharge. I had never experienced that. I've got no problem at all to date to report regarding that, but I would get shocked. And it's not a tiny little, cute little static electricity shock. I mean, that thing would hit you hard, like you could visibly see that spark come out and hit you. And that was very annoying. But knowing that there was that kind of electricity being stored in there and then releasing suddenly did make me think that it could damage the machine at some point. So by installing that wire, that copper braided wire, it goes all the way through the hose from one end to the other, connects to the machine. It connects and it's solidly grounded. It has a dedicated ground. And I also have the other end that goes into the bucket and sits down in the bottom. And I've had zero issues with static electricity since then. So that's something you might want to look at if you're getting zapped at all, because again, super annoying. I have everything connected, put basically in its place. I might move things around a little bit, and I have some tidying up to do with how the hoses are laying and the wires and so on. But I have it good enough where I can actually do a little bit of testing just to make sure everything is working the way it's supposed to. Once I confirm that, then I'll worry about tidying up the wires. And then I've got my hoses up above I want to get situated as well. So I've got the VFD. This will actually get mounted to the wall so it's out of the way, easier to access. The control box, it can live on the table. Maybe it's going to be this thing, maybe not. And then I've got the controller. And this is where we do our testing to make sure everything works right. So we've got right and left. And then actually moving the gantry portion of the CNC. And then up and down. Everything seems to be working the way it's supposed to. I'm going to spool up the spindle real quick, make sure there are no issues there. Everything seems to be working exactly the way it's supposed to. So now I'm going to take a few minutes and I've got to get my hoses for the coolant. I'm going to get those up in the air and suspended. And then also my dust collection hose isn't connected yet. And that's another one that'll be suspended from the ceiling. And once I get that up, I'll share with you what that looks like. I've got all of my hoses and wires suspended, and I did that with bungee cords mounted to a rafter above. The reason I like bungee cords is that if something were to get stuck, or a hose were to get caught on something, I feel like that extra little bit of give the bungee cord would provide could be really helpful. So that's why I use bungee cords. I used it in my previous setup in the old house, and it worked out really well. So I just pretty much duplicated that here. Now that I have everything up, I'm going to move the gantry and the head unit of the spindle in a picture frame pattern. And while I do that, I'm going to keep my eye on all the hoses and wires, and just making sure that things can move around as they're supposed to. I do have, there's still some slack here. I think that's doable, but I'm going to replace that carabiner with a larger round ring, I think. Yeah, I'd prefer to see that. Now I'm going to move the gantry towards me. Again, making sure I have enough slack, but not so much slack that you have any kind of interference where maybe a cable could come down and get caught in a moving mechanism. And I certainly don't have that. Bring the spindle down. See, I'm getting a little bit of pulling, and it's not that I don't have enough. It's that this carabiner is kind of catching on that orange hose a little bit. So I'm definitely going to swap that out. It might be good enough as it is, but I would rather not take any chances. Sometimes one of these carvings can take several hours, and I'm talking like I've had 12 and 14-hour cuts before, and I don't want to have to stop in the middle of one of those to fix where something is potentially binding. But aside from that little snafu with that carabiner, I'm happy with how this turned out. I think we're ready to go. And just like that, I'm done. I hope you enjoyed the video. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Hopefully you liked it. Maybe you hated it. That's okay too. If you haven't already done so, please hit that subscribe button and also that like button. That'll help me build my channel. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video from Hobby Universe Woodworking. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.